2016, former British Prime Minister David Cameron described Nigeria and Afghanistan as fantastically corrupt nations. Now, for weeks, Nigerians, both home and abroad, found fault in that statement and were quick to rush to the country's defense.
Well, but years after that statement and the president's drive to rid the country of corruption, the country has consistently found itself on many unflattering corruption rating index. A recent report computed and published by the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS, revealed that more than 400 billion naira was paid out to public officials as bribes in Nigeria between June 2015 and May 2016. That's just 1 year. Now, this only justified perception that Nigeria has a raging enemy against its development, and it's called corruption.
And Nigeria is again blazing the trail along with countries like Brazil, Colombia, Kenya, South Africa as a haven for bribe taking. And Nigeria occupies the third spot among 55 nations of the world on the 15th EY Global Fraud Survey on bribe taking. And that's after Brazil and Colombia. The survey noted that the level of bribery and corruption in emerging markets is twice that of developed markets. Now, how can Nigeria rid itself of this friendly evil, corruption, that manifests in diverse ways and has almost become a national culture?
Is it truly a friendly evil?
Well,
It's an unfriendly evil, if you ask.
Yeah, but the point there is that people have liked it, and people have
welcomed
it, and people are doing it. That's why it's almost like a national culture. So
it is. Well, we have joining us via Skype from Abuja as a communication outreach advisor, Open Government Partnership Secretariat, Uche Igwe. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning, Uche. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Uche Igwe, let's put it this way. Figures just make it even clearer that 1 out of 5 people under the age of 35 justify, cash payments to win or retain business in Nigeria and in other parts of Africa, which means it's become a culture. Yes, we refer to it as friendly evil earlier. How troubling is that?
Well, I think that we have to be cautious when organizations within and without begin to bandy statistics. Yes, corruption is an evil that is bedeviling many developing nations like Nigeria. Yes, there are issues of bribery, but I'm also interested to also note that it takes two to tango. For bribery to happen, the giver and the receiver are guilty. But oftentimes some of these reports, and by the way, I've looked at the EY report, it's an American report, and I found out that there's a lot of emphasis on the receiver of the bribes in this case, while so many companies and so many people who give the bribes are not mentioned. And I'm not going to be judgmental here, but Siemens is not a Nigerian company. I won't be judgmental here. But Halliburton is not a Nigerian company. How come some of these reports are quick to reflect and vilify and demonize nations on the receiving side, and some of these reports do not reflect nations on the giving side? For me, it takes two to tango.
Now, well, from the way you have put it, but one would also ask, what difference would it make really if the giver or the taker are not Nigerians? Should it make any difference whether the giver is within Nigeria or not?
It doesn't make a difference, because if the giver is not giving, probably the receiver will not receive. And I also think that when some of these reports hit the headlines, they have implications on the image of the nation and also the perception of the issues. But if there is a holistic picture that is being painted, it becomes very helpful. And that is why in Open Government Partnership, we emphasize corruption reality, not corruption perception. We emphasize coordinating interventions of anti-corruption so that we have a consensus of what to fight and not what not to fight. This is very crucial, because that shared understanding will be helpful. That coordination will be helpful, so that while we emphasize issues of statistics about the receiver, obviously, we should also spend some time to talk about the giver. By the way, I'm sure you also know that so many of these resources find their way directly or indirectly through surreptitious processes and end up in Western banks.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know that the Nigerian government is making several efforts to see if part, and I emphasize, part of these monies are retrieved. But you know, they don't make the headlines as much. Why is it that the European banks, the American banks that are holding on to some of these resources and monies looted from developing countries are not demonized alongside developing nations? For me, this lack of effort to paint this holistic picture, in my view, I consider it as hypocrisy. That does not in any way reduce the fact that some of these reports are potent tools for advocacy, that we need to do something as a nation to our problems of corruption by blocking these leakages. But for me, I think it's important to get the holistic picture.
Yes, indeed. And you do emphasize the hypocritical nature of, accusing the receiver, not the giver. Well, do you think there's a link really between poverty and this tendency to, go in the direction of corruption? The same EY report says that emerging markets actually twice, when it comes to corruption and bribery and all of that, that corruption and bribery happens in emerging markets more than in developed markets of, like Europe and the United States, for example.
Well, a couple of minutes ago, I was looking at several other reports and academic articles that talked about gift and bribery and cultural issues. For me, I think it is important to emphasize context. While I do not make excuses for those who demand bribes, I think it's important to understand that we are a gift-giving nation. We are also a nation where there are cultural issues that make it almost mandatory, for us to give gifts. And I think it is important to spend some time to differentiate between what is a gift and what is a bribe. And also emphasize that, some people who are perceiving this from outside may not really understand the cultural contours. For instance, I think that for me, it is important to define what a gift is and what a bribe is and the boundaries.
Yeah, but how can you define that really? I mean, if your gift, will influence,
or induce.
A gift is unsolicited. A bribe is demanded. Okay, so I think it is important to note that there's a blurred boundary, for want of a better word, between gift and bribe. And for those who understand the context, that we are a gift-giving nation. We are grateful people, okay? There is this tendency to mix bribery and gift-giving.
Yes, Dr. Igwe, someone would also say that we have also heard a lot of politicians in the past, some people who refer to some of these proceeds from bribery as gifts, because that thin line or that blurry line you talked about, a lot of people have hidden under that guise to say these things were just gifts. And we know the agenda at the end of the day is what makes a difference.
Well, I think that, our Nigerian laws have captured these things very succinctly. There is the Section 10 of the Code of Conduct Act of 1990. There is the Section 5 of the ICP Act 2000 that specifies what a bribe is. And I would like to quote that, a public officer, like in case of Section 10, subsection 123 of the Code of Conduct Bureau and Tribunal Act of 1990, of course, I'm sure it's been amended here and there, to say that a public officer shall not ask. And the key word here is ask or accept. So I think that when, anything, whatever it is asked for and demanded, it is at that point that it deviates from a gift and becomes a bribe. But when things are unsolicited, for me, as someone who is cultural, for me, as someone who understands the Nigerian context, as a gift-giving and grateful nation and grateful people,
all right,
we should also make sure that we know that we will continue to give gifts.
All right. Yeah, Dr. Igwe,
what's the difference between gift and bribe?
Yes. Now, what of the impact of the gift, the said gift? Someone will say semantics, but let us keep it away and put them in context. What of the impact of what the gift is going to do? If it falls in the category or in a situation where the gift is going to be a door opener or is going to be impactful on an awaiting act or event or a favor or something.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that both a gift and a bribe is intended for one thing or another. But the difference here is that one is unsolicited, so you can accept or reject. One is demanded, So if, for instance, I am having a wedding ceremony and somebody brings a gift, it is un-Nigerian to reject gifts.
Well, like when a judge gives a gift, a financial gift or monetary gift to another judge for the burial of his father, for example, it is a gift after all.
Well, I think that you have extended here. Like I told you.
Okay, let's bring it back home.
Is giving another judge or a lawyer is giving another judge, a gift for a burial. Then that gift is loaded. There are loaded gifts. Loaded with
okay, that's another dimension now.
We should make sure that we define where this gift gradually becomes.
Exactly, that's what we've been talking about.
The end game remains
simple as Western eyes make it look. Okay, so and that is why, as a country, we need to come to a consensus of where these things lie, as it relates to our laws, as it relates to our culture, without swallowing hook, line, and sinker the perspectives from the West and how they think about it. Because the context in the United Kingdom and the United States is different from the context here. And I also think that a deliberate effort to demonize some of these, permit me to say, gift-giving countries like Nigeria by placing bribery in a very one-sided manner without reflecting that both the giver and the receiver are
both guilty. Absolutely, we do agree with that. Definitely, we can't fault that mindset. But let's even bring in the bigger picture when it comes to fighting corruption. In spite of the war, the fight against corruption, and all of that, unethical behavior is on the rise in Nigeria. What exactly is the missing link? Are we fighting this as a symptomatic problem? Or are we really going to the root of why the average Nigerian would, be amenable to unethical behavior in the first place?
Well, I heard you talk about poverty.
Yes.
And one impact, one consequence of poverty is that, for instance, in the representative democracy, the represented are unable to place the right demands for public services and service delivery on the representatives. So the representative is allowed to go away with demands for private goods, money for burial, support for marriage, money for naming ceremonies, and tokenism. So I think that poverty is part of it. And I think that what we need to do is to get into that complicated conversation of political ethics. It is important that the same way we have rules that guide medical practice, rules that guide other professions like engineering, we should also think about ethics and rules that guide politics. It is difficult because at the end of the day, the representatives, they represented the people, because of poverty and pressures we do have. We sort of lose the direction in terms of placing the right demands on our representatives. So it comes back to the people. What you ask for is what you get. What kind of demands do we place on our political elites? Do we begin to ask for ethics? Can we sustain it? Do we begin to ask for delivery of public services and stop asking for private goods, support for school fees, support for transport, and support for burial events and naming ceremonies? I think that this is the beginning. So I throw it back to the demand side of things. What people demand is what they get. And I believe that it is possible for the political elite, understanding that there can be a repercussion in terms of during elections for wrong behavior, they will be willing to tilt to what the represented asked for.
Okay.
All right, we have to leave it here now. Dr. Uche Igwe, of the Communication and Outreach Advisor at the Open Government Partnership Secretariat. Thank you very much for talking to us on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.